Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness. It was about people who notice everything others miss, and why this ability often destroys them. In his clinical work, Jung documented patients with what he called differentiated perception. These were people who could read micro-expressions, detect hidden emotions, and recognize psychological patterns invisible to others. They could see through social masks, sense lies instantly, and feel the unconscious tension in any room. Jung considered this discovery dangerous because these individuals often ended up isolated, drained, and unable to maintain normal relationships. Not because they were unstable, but because constantly perceiving everything carried a psychological cost no one else understood. Today, I'll explain Jung's most dangerous discovery about people who see everything, and why he believed this. Rare ability either destroys you or transforms you into something extraordinary. The case that revealed this began with a patient Jung described in his private notes. She came to him in 1913, during the same period when Jung himself was navigating a personal crisis after his break with Freud. This patient, whom he identified as a rare introverted intuitive type, possessed what he called undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could enter any space and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere, who was lying, who was in pain, and who carried resentment. Jung wrote, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. She couldn't engage in casual conversation because she saw through every social facade. Friendships were difficult because people felt exposed around her. Employment was nearly impossible because her very presence disrupted the unconscious. Agreements that hold groups together." So Jung realized he wasn't treating illness. He was witnessing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious. When perception becomes so sharp, it threatens social survival. He noted that she described others with startling precision, as if she had access to their private thoughts and hidden motives. When Jung tested her observations with careful questioning, they proved remarkably accurate. This was not delusion. It was a level of awareness so heightened it became socially dangerous. But Jung uncovered something even more unsettling. He struggled to explain how such perception was possible. This led him to explore what he later called participation mystique, a psychological phenomenon where highly intuitive individuals become overwhelmed by the unconscious contents of those around them. In his Red Book notes, Jung wrote, "There are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment." Modern psychology supports his early insights. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive persons shows that about 20% of people are more emotionally and sensorially sensitive. But Jung identified something even narrower, the introverted intuitive type, which he estimated at roughly 1% of the population. Unlike others, they don't just feel more deeply, they perceive unconscious patterns with striking clarity. Jung observed that these individuals possessed what he called a differentiated intuitive function. Their minds process not only surface-level social cues, but also hidden emotions, repressed content, and collective psychological patterns. They notice the depression behind forced smiles, the desperation under confident presentations, and the unspoken shadow a group unconsciously agrees to ignore. He warned, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into." This is what Jung called the problem of the superior function. When your greatest strength becomes a burden because it separates you from collective belonging. But Jung found that the real danger wasn't perception itself. It was that those with heightened awareness became targets for what he called shadow projection. Because they reveal unconscious truths others refuse to face, people attack them as a defense mechanism. In Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." He later extended this principle to all human relationships. When someone's shadow is reflected back by another's clear perception, the unconscious mind has only two options: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Jung documented this recurring pattern throughout his clinical work. The person who perceives most clearly is often blamed for creating the very problems they are only observing. His patients with strong intuitive awareness experience this repeatedly. When they gently suggested someone might be struggling, they were accused of being negative or stirring up drama. When they pointed out obvious issues, they were criticized for being judgmental or inventing problems. Jung recognized this was not coincidence, but a psychological defense mechanism. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But for many, it is easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to confront what is being revealed. This dynamic creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become the identified problem in groups, not because they cause issues, but because they expose what already exists in the collective unconscious. Jung observed, the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. This helps explain why such individuals not only feel misunderstood, but also systematically targeted by forces they cannot rationally explain. Yet Jung's most unsettling discovery was still ahead. He observed that overwhelming perception expressed itself differently depending on the individual. He identified 4 distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each showing a different way unconscious material is processed. Type 1. The feeling intuitive. These individuals combine introverted intuition with a developed feeling function. They don't just perceive psychological dynamics, they physically feel them. They absorb others' emotions so fully that they often struggle to separate their own feelings from those unconsciously taken on. Jung wrote, "The feeling intuitive lives in a state of continual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment." Type 2. The thinking intuitive. These individuals identify psychological patterns and predict behavioral outcomes with striking accuracy. They can foresee relationship breakdowns, career failures, or crises well before they occur, not through deliberate analysis, but through unconscious recognition of patterns. Jung noted, they possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. Type 3. The sensation intuitive. These individuals detect the physical signs of psychological states. They sense illness before symptoms surface, fatigue before it is admitted, or tension that reveals hidden emotional distress. Jung wrote, "These individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical illness in their environment." Type 4. The pure intuitive. The rarest type, these individuals combine introverted intuition with what Jung called an undifferentiated auxiliary function. They perceive everything but struggle to organize or articulate their impressions. Jung observed they live in a state of continual overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious material without sufficient structure to process it constructively. Understanding which type applies to you is essential, since each requires a different approach to what Jung termed the integration challenge. But before addressing solutions, Jung warned of why this discovery was so dangerous. He saw firsthand the destructive effects of undifferentiated perception. The ability to perceive deeply without proper integration posed real risks to both the individual and the collective. He identified three specific dangers. Danger 1, disruption of the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, "The individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. When someone sees through the shared illusions that bind groups together, the silent agreements to avoid certain truths, they disrupt stability. Families, organizations, and societies often rely on these unconscious agreements. The highly perceptive person undermines them simply by being authentic." Danger 2, psychological isolation. Jung described how heightened perception creates what he called the problem of superior function, when one's greatest strength also becomes the source of suffering. He wrote, "The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. The individual becomes, in his words, an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation is not only social, but also existential. Such individuals often feel as if they are living in an entirely different reality from those around them." Danger 3, identity, dissolution. Jung warned that one of the greatest risks of absorbing unconscious material from others is the loss of authentic self. When people become overloaded with external psychological content, they can no longer separate their own inner world from what they've taken in from the environment. Jung called this state participation mystique, a condition where boundaries dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious material. He cautioned that the risk here is not just social alienation, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individuality through collective possession. For this reason, Jung emphasized that integrating superior perception was not only important, but urgent. Left unintegrated, it carried serious dangers. This is why he developed what he called the individuation process, a structured path for preserving identity while building a conscious relationship with unconscious contents. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. Jung taught his highly perceptive patients to notice when they were absorbing thoughts and emotions that did not belong to them. He referred to this as conscious discrimination, the ability to separate authentic inner experience from external content taken in unconsciously. He wrote, "The first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development." As a technique, Jung instructed patients to spend time daily in complete solitude, allowing outside influences to settle so their authentic inner voice could emerge more clearly. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Jung observed that those who easily detect shadows in others often struggle because they have not yet faced their own. The more you deny personal tendencies toward deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more unsettled you become when encountering these traits externally. He explained, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves if we have the courage to look inward rather than outward." Shadow integration means recognizing that every quality seen in others also exists within you. This does not make you flawed, it makes you whole, enabling you to see others without harsh judgment. Phase 3. Conscious participation. The final phase involves what Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious, the ability to engage with the psychological material of others without losing individuality. He wrote, "The individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own integrity. To achieve this, Jung emphasized the need to develop psychological containers, the capacity to hold others' unconscious material temporarily, while remembering it does not belong to you. Jung believes superior perception either transforms or destroys a person. To understand this difference, he studied historical figures who embodied both outcomes. The case of Nietzsche. Unintegrated perception. Jung admired Nietzsche's philosophy, but observed how his extraordinary perception ultimately contributed to psychological collapse. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung described Nietzsche's ability to cut through social, religious, and philosophical facades with piercing clarity. Yet, Nietzsche never learned to integrate these insights. Instead of applying his perception for healing, he often used it as a weapon against society. Jung wrote, Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. His isolation and eventual breakdown illustrated the dangers of perception without integration. The individual becomes consumed by what they perceive rather than transformed by it. The case of Meister Eckhart. Successful integration. By contrast, Jung saw the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart as an example of integrated superior perception. Eckhart possessed what Jung called mystical intuition, a capacity to perceive psychological and spiritual realities hidden from most people. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart directed these insights toward compassionate service. Jung observed, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly, but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. For Jung, Eckhart embodied how superior perception could be integrated into wisdom, balance, and service. Jung observed that Eckhart's influence came from what he described as conscious humility, the recognition that heightened perception is a gift to be shared with wisdom, not a tool for domination. Jung himself experienced a similar challenge during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious between 1913 and 1919, recorded in the Red Book. He admitted, I was threatened by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening through my work with patients. His deep perception of unconscious material, both his own and that of others, nearly destroyed him until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously. The breakthrough came when Jung recognized that such overwhelming perceptions were not pathological, but evolutionary. They represented consciousness attempting to grow beyond collective limitations. This realization reshaped his work with patients, especially since those with heightened perception often experience deep isolation. To address this, Jung stressed the importance of finding what he called the few who understand, individuals capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness. In The Development of Personality, Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he emphasized that this privilege cannot be realized in isolation. It requires recognition by others who can witness authenticity. Jung identified 3 essential relationship types for highly perceptive individuals. Type 1. Fellow individuated persons. Jung noted that individuated people recognize each other instantly. There is an unmistakable quality of authenticity that cannot be imitated. These connections, though rare, are vital for psychological survival. With such people, one can be entirely authentic, without fear of rejection or intimidation. Type 2. Those engaged in individuation. Individuals actively involved in self-discovery, through therapy, inner work, or spiritual practice, can often respond to superior perception without defensiveness. While they may not share the same capacity, they value and respect it. Jung observed, those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others. Type 3. Natural containers. These are people who, though not gifted with heightened perception themselves, can hold psychological material without becoming overwhelmed. Often, they are mature individuals shaped by significant life challenges. Jung also described indicators for identifying safe relationships. Such people ask sincere questions instead of reacting defensively. They can admit their own contradictions without shame, show psychological mindedness, remain calm in the face of uncomfortable truths, and display genuine curiosity about growth and consciousness. To protect both oneself and others, Jung advised a gradual revelation process. Begin with small, gentle observations. Notice how the other person responds. Assess whether their reaction is defensive or curious. Increase depth only if their capacity allows. Frame insights as contributions, not pronouncements. Jung stressed that the goal is not to find people who agree with everything you perceive, but to find those who treat your insights as valuable contributions rather than threats. When integrated, superior perception benefits both personal growth and collective evolution. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." He believed that those who integrate superior perception become what he called culture carriers, individuals who help consciousness advance. He outlined 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. The first step is acknowledging perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. Jung described this as conscious acceptance of the superior function. The beginning of wisdom, he wrote, is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be. Stage 2. Integration without isolation. The second stage involves using perception constructively while sustaining meaningful relationships. Jung called this social individuation, becoming authentically yourself while remaining engaged with others. He observed that the individuated person does not withdraw from life, but participates in it more consciously. Stage 3. Service without sacrifice. The third transformation occurs when perception shifts from being a burden to becoming a gift offered in service. Jung described this as conscious participation, using one's abilities to benefit others without personal depletion. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole." Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. The final stage reflects what Jung called the transcendent function, using perception to advance collective consciousness without needing validation or recognition. Jung observed, the individuated person works for the future, not for personal recognition in the present. The integration becomes cultural medicine. He believed that those who integrate heightened perception serve a vital evolutionary role, seeing what collective consciousness has not yet acknowledged and preparing humanity for essential growth. As Jung stated, what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. Those who achieve integration help surface unconscious material before it erupts destructively in collective behavior. Yet Jung also warned of pitfalls that can undermine this transformation. He documented the most common ways individuals derail their own development. Pitfall 1. The inflation trap. Jung wrote extensively about psychological inflation, when individuals identify with their superior function rather than integrating it consciously. In his essays on analytical psychology, he warned, the danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. Highly perceptive people often fall into what he called the prophet complex, believing they must rescue others from unconsciousness. This leads to judgment, preaching, and isolation. Jung cautioned, "The moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand." Pitfall 2. Withdrawal and justification. Jung also described cases where individuals use their perception to justify complete withdrawal from society, convincing themselves that others were too unconscious to engage with. He recognized this as spiritual superiority disguised as wisdom. He wrote, "True individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it." Pitfall 3. The helper's identity. Some highly perceptive people become dependent on being needed, defining themselves solely through helping others and neglecting their own development. Jung warned, when perception becomes identity, the IT person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. Pitfall 4. The overwhelm return. Even those who achieve integration may regress during times of stress, trauma, or transition. They may lose boundaries and again absorb the unconscious material of others. Jung emphasized that integration is not a permanent achievement, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. Maintaining integration. To support long-term balance, Jung outlined practices for healthy integration. Regular solitude to separate personal content from absorbed material. Conscious decisions about when and with whom to use perceptive abilities. Ongoing. Shadow work to reduce projection of unconscious material. Relationships with others who provide perspective and support. Creative expression as an outlet for excess perceptual input. Jung wrote, "The integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity." Because Jung always considered superior perception within the context of collective psychological growth, he viewed highly perceptive individuals as vital to human evolution. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." He saw these individuals as consciousness pioneers, people whose psychological development precedes collective readiness. Historically, they often appeared before society could accept their insights, acting as scouts for new psychological frontiers that humanity would eventually need to explore. Jung explained, "What appears in the individual first, as psychological insight, later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation." Throughout history, the individual has served as a testing ground for consciousness, experiments that ultimately benefit the whole. Carl Jung believed that in the modern era, highly perceptive individuals might sense patterns long before others. Notice them. Psychological trends shaping collective behavior, signs of environmental and social unsustainability, spiritual possibilities beyond traditional religion, technological implications not yet considered, and hidden collective shadow material needing integration. Jung's insight was that sensitive individuals often feel collective problems first and most intensely. Their personal struggles frequently reflect issues that society as a whole must confront, but the key, Jung explained, is service without martyrdom. Superior perception supports human evolution most effectively when integrated consciously, not suffered unconsciously. The purpose is not to become a martyr for awareness, but a bridge between present reality and what is emerging. Jung put it clearly, the individuated person serves the collective, not by sacrificing individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. At the highest level of development, Jung noted, Highly perceptive individuals carry their abilities with lightness. They see clearly without attachment, accept what they perceive, and engage deeply without the compulsion to fix everything. He called this the transcendent function, serving the evolution of consciousness naturally, not by forcing or preaching, but by embodying more conscious ways of being. Consider Jung's patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who came to him during his own crisis. After 3 years of working through individuation, her life changed dramatically. She learned to separate her own inner material from what she absorbed from others. She built a career in counseling, where her refined perception helped others in need. She developed relationships with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her perception as a curse and recognized it as a gift requiring conscious development. Jung wrote about her transformation. She did not learn to see less, but to see more wisely. She did not stop perceiving deeply, but instead engaged more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became balanced rather than overwhelming. This illustrates Jung's most challenging discovery. Some individuals are born with a level of consciousness that surpasses collective readiness. Such advanced perception can either overwhelm and isolate them or evolve them into exactly what humanity needs for psychological growth. Your heightened perception is not a flaw, it is an advanced stage of consciousness. You are not broken because you notice what others overlook. In fact, you are ahead of your time. The real question is not whether you should suppress your perception to fit collective norms, but whether you will develop the individuation skills needed to integrate it consciously. Jung's individuation process offers this path, from isolation to service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological burden to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see, not to suffer silently, but to assist in the evolution of consciousness. The world needs your insights, but it needs them expressed with integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness, so that perception becomes cultural medicine rather than personal torment. Your gift is not the burden. The burden lies in being unconscious of your gift. When you integrate it, you become what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals are meant to be, pioneers of consciousness, preparing humanity for psychological growth that is inevitable, though not yet obvious. Jung's most dangerous discovery was not simply that some people see everything, but that many never learn to use what they see with wisdom. The risk is not in perception itself, but in failing to form a conscious relationship with extraordinary ability. You are not too much for this world. You are precisely what consciousness evolution requires once you learn to wield perception as consciously as Jung himself did. The challenge of seeing everything is not in the amount you perceive, but in whether you develop the integration and wisdom your gift demands. If Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual resonates with you, you may belong to the rare psychological type he considered essential for humanity's evolution. Share in the comments which type of differentiated perceiver you identify with. Your individuation journey connects with others on the same path. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about psychological development that transcends the limits of collective unconsciousness. And if you're ready to dive deeper into Jung's perspective on sensitive psychological types, watch my video on 7 dangerous Carl Jung psychology places that destroy your mind. In it, I explore the environments most toxic to highly perceptive individuals and Jung's strategies for protecting consciousness in an unconscious world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next dimension.